All right, great. He'll jump in. So we're going to call the meeting of the Nagog Hill Orchard Ad Hoc Working Group to order at 6:03 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for coming forward and applying to be part of this group. Really appreciate it. I know that there was some other people who had put in their names who weren't chosen, and I'm glad to see that it looks like they're on the call as well, which is really helpful. So I think the first thing that we need to do is really organize the group as far as a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk. I think that would be really helpful just to, as far as scheduling and just keeping the momentum going forward. So I didn't know if anybody had any interest in being the chair of the committee or any one of those positions. If anyone has any interest, feel free to speak up. Anyone? Amy, I can see it.
I was going to say, go ahead, Amy.
I can see it. I can see it.
At the seams.
She is.
I'm a really bad note taker, so I'm probably not the best clerk around.
That's all right. Are you good at scheduling and calling meetings and posting agendas?
I think I can do that. Yeah.
All right, great. Excellent. So I'm going to make a motion to appoint Amy Tarla Lewis as clerk of the Nagog Hill Orchard Ad Hoc Working Group.
So my job is
clerk, chair. Sorry, my bad.
And I second that for her.
All
Wait,
right,
did you say that was the chair position?
Yeah, this is the chair position.
Oh, no.
No?
Wait, which one do you want, Amy? You've got 3 choices.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, what are the job descriptions for all 3?
Hi, Paul.
There is none. So chair, vice chair, clerk.
Right.
I'll do vice chair.
Oh, no, that's mine, Amy. You're the chair.
Oh, come on, Jen.
No, I have to be forthcoming with you guys. I am not on social media.
Okay.
So in
That's
terms
better.
of, setting up meetings and doing all of that, I don't do any of that.
We coordinate that in our office. So just have to work with us to pull together the agenda.
Right.
And we take care of the details.
Either one. I was going to go for vice chair. Seems like Amy has
I'm
all this
vice
knowledge.
chair. I'm vice chair. It's mine.
Whatever you guys need. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So, Paul, what are your thoughts?
Apologize for getting on my phone because the link was texted to me, but not email. I raced home to get in front of the laptop, and I end up looking at my phone anyway. Any combination of the above is fine. That's fine. I mean,
Okay, because we do need a chair, vice chair, and clerk. You agree with that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, we're still, it's going to be such a short term. Our intent, anyways, is to be a short term operation toward a certain goal, and so I don't know how relevant a lot of that's going to be, but
Right.
it's nonetheless chair anyway, and just to fill out the obligations, we should fill out the other spots too.
Right. Yeah, like the chair just runs the meeting.
Right.
Amy,
So-
that's definitely you.
I'm already in charge of 2 teenage boys and 1 nonprofit farm and a husband that works too many hours.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to make a motion to appoint Amy Tarla Lewis as vice chair of the Nagog Hill Orchard Ad Hoc Working Group.
Sounds great.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Great.
I think Cindy on Zoom meetings, and Joe, correct me if
Oh,
I'm
it's going to be a
wrong,
roll call.
Roll call.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
All right. So Jen Clancy,
Yes, here.
Sarah Seward,
Yes for Jen.
Will Pickard.
Yeah.
Paul Glavy.
Yes.
Cindy Napoli is yes, and Amy Tarlo Lewis, yes, accepts the appointment. Perfect. Okay, so the other big one is the clerk taking the notes, keeping meeting minutes and things like that. Is anybody up for that fun task? Anyone?
I'm going to offer that we delegate the minute taking to Joe if he's joining us anyway, so that the clerk's position is more ceremonial in nature. Do you object to that, Joe?
There's a reason I'm recording the meeting because I know all this stuff.
All right. He's been here before.
Smart man. Right. All right, perfect. All right, that was a good suggestion, Paul. Okay, so now just chair.
I think one thing that might be helpful starting a new committee is to back up a step and to understand what the time frame is for this. So whether we're treating it more like a task force where we have a defined time and
Right.
goals, I think it's hard and I appreciate the volunteers taking forth, but I think it's difficult for someone to step up without knowing what the expectations are. So
Right.
perhaps we can come back to that at the end of the meeting if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, Sarah. Let's do that. So let's do that. So the next thing on the agenda was to recap where we're at, what brought us to this point, the mission of the group, and things of that nature. So I did send out a bunch of attachments to everybody that Paul and Joe had shared with me, which I think are really helpful. So just to back up, as you know, the select board entered into a.
You
Oh, go ahead,
might
Paul.
lose me for a minute because I'm going to jump off the phone and get on the laptop. All right.
Okay.
So while we're doing that, Cindy, can we back up just another step and can we introduce everyone and kind of get a sense for everyone's, how they're vested and perhaps what their talents are? So, or not even talents, but like what their experience is. So I know for some, I know some people, but I don't know everyone. So.
Oh, sure. Yep. So let's start with you, Sarah.
Okay, so I didn't volunteer for anything because I work full time, but I also chair the Conservation Commission right now, and we meet every other week. So I've been very fortunate that I grew up right next to the orchard. So I kind of know it well and feel like I know the land. I also helped co-author the 2 grants that were written to help acquire funding for this, and that was many years ago. So, but yeah, so I would love to see how I can help. I've got a background in land stewardship and also really nuts and bolts. As a camp director, you tend to wear many roles. So happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Jen Clancy?
Yep. So I've been self-employed for 30 years. I pride myself in my ability to sniff out leads and follow leads and just dig up information. And I guess I bring sort of the business background to this. I, of course, abut the orchard as well. And we've been here 26 years. I've seen a lot of changes. I walk past that orchard all the time. Last couple of years, it's been very distressing to see how it's fallen in disrepair, if you will, and it needs to be brought back to health. So I recently retired, but then started working again because I can't sit idle, but I have some additional free time. I don't have teenage boys at home. Mine's 29, so that ship has sailed for me. So I do have a little bit of free time, and my interest is just to coordinate all these great minds that we have. Everyone's got all these different talents, and just try to be part of this group and get everything together and figure out what the best solution is going to be for the orchard.
Excellent, thank you. And Amy?
I'm Amy Tarla Lewis, and I've been living here since 2004 with my husband and our 2 boys. And I'm currently the executive director and also the founder at Littleton Community Farm. We're a 501c3 small farm. It's 2.8 acres that's essentially dedicated to hunger relief. So I have a strong background in social social advocacy and hunger. And community-based organizations.
Excellent, thank you. And Will Pickard?
My name is Will Pickard, lifelong resident of Littleton. Been chairing AgCom for the last several years. I operate a dairy farm with my parents up on Bruce Street, and I'm also on the Massachusetts Farm Bureau Board of Directors at the state level. So interested to see what refinements can be made with the orchard and finding a path forward that gives it some new life.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Glavy?
Paul Glavy. I've been off and on the Board of Selectmen since the time when first met with the trustees of the Morrison Family Trust and put together the purchase of the property with others for the town, and then ultimately was on the board also when we did the initial RFP and ended up awarding the lease, which lasted successfully for a couple of decades with Charles Auger. And on the times that I've been on the board, I have been usually involved in one form or other in the lease process and other interactions with the folks that are running the orchard.
Excellent, thank you. And my name's Cindy Napoli. I'm a lifelong resident of Littleton. I am a member of the Littleton Select Board. I'm in the middle of my second term on the board. I'm also the chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee and vice chair of the Littleton Affordable Housing Trust. So my interest in helping the orchard and working with this group is to see if we can pull together an action plan, short-term and long-term, to make sure that we sustain and retain this vital asset for our community, which clearly means a lot to many people. So that is why I wanted to be involved with this group. And thank you again, everybody who came forward to assist with this process. So I guess what brought us up to this point, there's, a lease agreement that we entered into, as Mr. Glavy spoke of, a few years ago with Charles Auger. We did begin to explore a succession plan with Mr. Auger, and we did issue an RFP. There was somebody that came forward who responded to that RFP, and we were in the middle of negotiating with that person because they didn't quite fit the specific mold of what we were looking for. And as those conversations were ongoing and active between the select board and this individual, we gradually began to notice issues at the orchard that required immediate attention and, concerns that were brought forward to us, not only from visiting the orchard, but also expressed through other residents in the town. Over the past year or so, there been several visits to the orchard. We did realize in hindsight that we were being given tours of the orchard and shown what they wanted us to see, unfortunately. And so we kind of became more proactive and began paying a little bit more attention to what was going on there. It's really unfortunate for us that we got to this point because we had a very productive and successful long-term relationship with Mr. Auger. And things were going very well for a very long time. Unfortunately, things went downhill pretty fast, I would say. So I know in recent months, there's been tours of the orchard. We did have another orchardist come in. It was a father and son who did explore the orchard with members of the select board. There were some other groups that were up there as well with Selectman DeCoste. And so we decided as a select board, what we needed to do is pull together a group and figure out what we need to do immediately to address concerns at the orchard, or what mitigation strategy we need in the short term. Like, what do we need to do right now to the orchard? And what do we need to do in the long term? And really, to Sarah's point, I think what we're looking for is just to stabilize the orchard, identify what we need to do now. It's November, right? And then what strategies we need to implement in the spring. And the select board's going to be working towards issuing another RFP and figuring out, what exactly we want to do with the orchard in the long term and who we want to come in and have run it and what we want that to look like. So as far as there is an endpoint to this committee, and anything that we do come up with as far as recommendations goes, we need to bring back to the select board and just run it by them and have them either, approve it or not approve it, or just get on board with it, just to make sure that we keep those lines of communications open between this group and the board, and everybody knows what they're doing, what we're doing and what we're proposing, because we want to do what's best for the orchard. So that being said, Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think you got most of it very succinct, and I concur with all of it. I would just add a couple of points. I think an important part of what we can do is either through new resources or those that we've already identified with prior help from people like Will and others who brought forward the the people with some expertise, the O'Neills that you referenced earlier, or others, to do an assessment of what the status is. That's one level of mission that needs to get done to bring back a story to the selectmen that can lead to a good judgment. And then also what some of the and then what kind of time frame is involved in addressing any pressing issues with the orchard as it stands right now. And then there's the more practical aspect of doing a little bit of analysis on what potential end uses within our restraints, our legal constraints are viable that we might go forward on. I think it's more important that we bring back facts of where the orchard stands and what our options are, rather than, I don't think our charge is necessarily specific to coming back with a single recommendation, as it is an assessment and different options. And I think that's about
Right.
it.
So as far as an assessment goes, so getting somebody in there right now to assess the condition of the orchard, like we had the O'Neills come in and they did drive the property. I think Will was there with that group as well.
Yeah, I was there too.
Yeah, and they had offered at the time to tag certain trees, ones that required some immediate care and maintenance, others that were going to eventually be just taken down, that weren't worth the effort, I believe. So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on that. I know Jen, you had reached out to a few
Yep.
people. Do you want to share that?
Sure. So I reached out to 3 people. The first one was Autumn Hills Orchard in Groton. The owner of that is Ed Herdick. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And the grower is Peter Morton. And Peter was pretty busy. He said he really couldn't take a look at anything until the first of the year, but he gave me a great resource, a gentleman by the name of Pat Crixionadis, who's a farmer. He's a consultant. He belongs to the Mass Fruit Growers Association. He's involved with Brooksby Farm up in Peabody. He also has a UMass soils degree, and he's a rep for pesticides. He actually knew Charles Auger pretty well and used to work with Charles. And he was a little hesitant to take the conversation any further. He didn't want to step on Charles's toes. And I said, well, we're having a meeting. I don't have any more details, but he was more than willing to help in any way. He said he could provide all sorts of resources like pruners, people for protection of the orchard. And he says, I know that orchard well. And he says, and basically what you guys are facing is not insurmountable. So he was very positive. So he was the first one. The second one was Tom Napoli from Idlewild Farms, who I understand Cindy is no relation.
No relation, unfortunately. Yeah.
He was great. I spoke to him for about a half an hour, and he said, I have one word for you guys, heirloom. And he just said that, it's pretty interesting about how there's this surge in heirloom seeds, heirloom apples. There's a lot of talk about, look at Carlson Orchards, the ciders they're producing. And I think via Amy, one of the emails back and forth, Evan mentioned something about he spoke with a hard cider producer. So there's that aspect. So Tom was basically saying that, he was pretty busy with the holidays, but come first of the year, if he could be of any help, he knew the orchard and he was willing to step in. And then the third one was Jared Byrne, and he runs Berlin Orchards. I don't know if any of you know him at all, but really, really nice guy. He said he could come up and take a look. So he runs Berlin Orchards, and he runs a landscaping business basically from now, snow plowing, so on and so forth. But he said he can come up and take a look. Apple trees need to be pruned in the winter, peaches pruned in April. And I said, would you be willing to do that? And I said, I have no authority to offer you a job, but I'm just kind of feeling things out. And he said, sure. He said that, and I asked him how would he be compensated, and he said the job really depends on how neglected the trees are. So it could be by the tree or by the hour. And he said if he couldn't do it, he could recommend a couple of different people. So it was at this point just kind of getting our, just trying to see who might be able to help us. And everybody was wonderful. And they told us about Mass Fruit Growers Association, Mass Ag, the UMass Ag Extension, the Mass Farm Bureau, IPM, Integrated Pest Management Practices. It was just really, really interesting about all the resources and people willing to step in and help.
That's wonderful. That's great. And then Amy, who did you have contact with?
So I was put in contact with a gentleman by the name of Evan Owens, who had farmed the orchard under Charlie from time to time. And he and I spent a little bit of time walking around the orchard. He also said that the problems on the orchard were not insurmountable. He thought it could take potentially a year or two to really get it up and going again, based on, the limited walk that we had taken. His concerns, again, were about, things like scab on the orchard, the way the trees have been pruned or have not been pruned. We also both noticed there's still a lot of standing water at the orchard. So although I don't believe there's an erosion issue there, I think there's definitely a drainage area issue around the farm. The ditches around the orchard have not been maintained, so that needs to be dealt with. In addition, he has planted trees in this lower part of the field that looks like it's still pretty wet. So we're not really sure why he tried to plant trees down there, because I think it's just a generally wet area and trees are never really going to go do really well down there. He had also mentioned that he felt that there was some pretty large equipment that was missing from the farm. He mentioned 2 different types of tractors, a 30 by 10 John Deere tractor, and then a TO20 that was missing, that was small. And so I don't know, I guess this may be a question for Joe. Does the town have an inventory of its assets that the town owns at the farm, so it can walk around the farm and identify what belongs to the town and what belongs? I don't know if Charlie made personal investments in equipment and what he has the right to sell, because Evan said that he works for an orchard that makes cider, that his orchard has been approached by Charlie for selling equipment. And so I don't know if he's selling town equipment or his own equipment. The bigger picture concern I have with that is, running an orchard takes a lot of equipment. And if there's assets there and they go disappearing, then who is going to replace that equipment? I mean, some of those tractors can be $60,000, $50,000, $70,000 tractors. And so that's
we no longer own any of that equipment. That issue was dealt with years ago when the initial stock that Mr. Morrison owned that was conveyed to us began to age, and the whole question came up of, is the town going to continue to own this, in which case we'd have to maintain and replace them, or would we just convey it over to Mr. Auger and then it would all become his responsibility? And that was probably 10 years ago or more, probably.
So he owns all that equipment?
Yeah, whatever's there, most of it, he's probably purchased himself, but even
Right.
the older pieces.
Right.
Okay.
And Mark, who is his son, recently purchased a lot of equipment too that's up there. So it's not the town's equipment.
Yeah. So one thing, and I don't want to digress too far, and you can we can address this at another meeting if you want, but I was looking at the sample lease that had been set up. And so one of the things I've noticed in it, and I don't know if this is the lease the town is looking at running at, but it seems like, from the way I read it, that the new farm manager would have to really invest pretty heavily in their own equipment. And I think my concern is the capital cost that a farmer would have to incur to come to the farm to get it up and running would be so insurmountable that this lease would really deter a lot of farm managers from considering an RFP against for the town.
Do you want to speak to that, Paul?
Yeah, it's important to keep that in context. Amy, I asked Joe to forward that along with some of the other information. It's mostly informational, but it's valuable, I think, in context. And that's that. Keep in mind that RFP lease, that lease language as a successor to the RFP, which was less detailed, was indeed specific to the anticipated arrangement with Mark Auger. And, so it was all in that, with that in mind. However, those details about the equipment are, had that arrangement of a transition in mind. It has no impact on what we may or may not decide to do in a successor RFP. I think the value there is just to see the sort of things that we can put in there in terms of requirements, mandates, and the like, because a lot of the new language in that lease that wasn't in earlier leases, that proposed lease that wasn't in earlier leases, were about accountabilities that specifically the AgCom had requested, a few years ago, that, we were kind of hanging out there just based on something not much more than a handshake agreement 20 odd years ago, which was awfully wonderful because he was about the only game in town who was interested in doing it. Now that whole world has changed, but so the proposed lease there was seeking to achieve a lot more baseline accountabilities that the town could hang their hat on. But as far as issues as far as equipment, that's very much up, and that can be dealt with in a variety of different ways.
And I think that.
Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, just to add on to what Paul was saying was, we had been told that there's significant amount of investment that's needed. And I mean, it's as clear today as it was a year ago when we were putting out the RFP, that there was investment in equipment, in the buildings. And the RFP that had a draft lease and then a sort of an iterative version really started to highlight the how we were trying to come up with a way to allow for a longer term lease, to allow for more investment. We knew some form of loan was going to be needed with a lease that identified a longer term relationship with the town. We just never ended up in a place to even really move it forward out of that track change version. So going forward, while that may be a starting place, depending on what this group ends up recommending for options to the select board, that would absolutely change, and basically the RFP as well as that could be thrown out and something totally new pulled together.
So the work of this ad hoc group would help to kind of define a new lease and RFPs. Is that correct?
Sure can. No good ideas will be, sloughed off. I'm sorry, but
yeah, exactly. So, Sarah, did you have anything to add?
I do have a quick question. When is Charles issued to vacate?
A few weeks ago.
Yeah. What is the date?
We had given them basically it's beginning of December for a date, but we've recognized that there's going to be some sort of pushback as far as exactly what that date is, and I'm in near constant contact with him, as he asks for access to buildings, and I go out in the morning and then unlock it on the way home. And so he keeps telling me, if you guys want me out, I need to be able to get access and get all my equipment out. So we know that it's on his mind and is being reinforced. The select board's letter is being reinforced by staff, the town administrator, myself. It's a work in progress, but I know we're going to end up, for someone that's been there for 20 years. He keeps saying 35, Paul. I know sometimes the Littleton years seem longer than they actually
Yeah,
are.
well, my memory gets fuzzy too. I think it's longer than 20 because
Yeah, no, I think it's longer than 20, but Joe, can you just clarify for us in terms of access? So what does he have access to now and does not? And that's just a simple question.
So right now the single family house there's not any restrictions on access on there. There are locks at the main barn up at where the farm stand is. Basically all the doors there. The lower barn, both on the street, and there's garage bays in the back, as well as that small cottage. So we have all locks. Those are all things that we have the keys in our office. He has recently asked for access to the barn. That's down the hill. I actually went in there today with our local inspector, and I can even show you some pictures from inside. Quite honestly, there's a lot of questionable material that's in there, like old couches that are thrown on their sides, old fridges, old TVs, tires. Leave it to everyone else later on in the meeting if we want to run through some of those pictures just to see what I had seen. I had documented in case anyone wanted to see it, all those buildings today. A lot of the equipment that's there is rusting out. It's been left outside. Some of the mowers, tires are rotting off. Old tools that are not operational.
Paul, go ahead.
Joe, and to the group, mindful that there is, this is a touchy legal area since this lease ran out in January and papers were served, whatever it was, a month ago with the deadline that Joe mentioned for December. I think it's important for us not to get into too much discussion on anything that might be relative to anything that might be happening legal. That doesn't prevent us being able to talk about prospectively going forward with operations and the status of the orchard. But when it gets into the equipment and buildings and all the rest of that, I don't know when or whether that may ever become germane, but I just want to be cautious on that front.
One question I have is the house that Charles is presently living in, if he does vacate that, which he needs to, is that available for someone to live in? I.e., one of the thoughts I had was if we approach maybe the Mass Ag School, if there is a young person there who maybe would want to live there and tend to the orchard. I didn't know if that house is part of the orchard, part of working the orchard, if that is kind of a selling point. But of course, if he's living there, then we can't offer that.
And I think that's something that we'll discuss, Jim, when we get to the point where we're going to figure out issuing an RFP and what we can offer to anybody to attract them to the orchard. Certainly the house is part of the package, so to speak. Okay. So, yeah. Will, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Is it possible to get the group up there for a visit on site with perhaps the O'Neills or one of the other consultants, preferably before it gets snow cover on it, and just have a look and a reference point for the group to understand what we're looking at with a map, rough idea of boundary lines, that sort of thing. And also one of the sticking points on the property as far as developing an RFP is what can you do with it? The APRs or agricultural preservation restrictions have been sold off of most of it. And there's specific things that you can and cannot do. under those covenants that go with APRs. So a review of the APR restrictions would be a really important place to start. A lot of orchards and other farms are latching onto a lot of the agritourism or agritainment. You know, if you have 80 acres of apple trees, that's a real, at this point in time, a real limiting factor. If you could put in a 5 or 7 acre corn maze, then that has a different attractive value to it. Other things like wedding venues and things like that allow the place to remain an orchard, but can augment the income of an interested party. I think that the APRs is a really important place to start on that, as well as a visit. So when we're discussing things, it's all fresh in our mind.
Okay.
And I think Jen had some great, when you mentioned Brooksby Farm, there, the standards are set behind them. So I think where the O'Neills have been in, if we could bring in a new set of eyes, I think every time we bring someone new in, hopefully we'll captivate some other ideas. Will, do you have a someone that you would refer that is part of Farm Bureau or Mass Growers that, is excellent in terms of reviewing for free APRs?
I could get that. I know, Brad Mitchell's fairly familiar with the APR thing and the APR program. There's also an APR committee or commission. And one of the things that's come up that's interesting is it's odd that there hasn't been an audit of the APRs to find out that, what's been going on, and whether or not the APRs have been, the covenants have been kept up, the agreements. So it's not something we want to perhaps go stir up, but we should have a copy of the APR restrictions and find out that, this section has to remain orchard, this section can be berries or, orchard, or what the variations are on the restrictions. I'm sure Farm Bureau, if I ask, I can get a resource of someone that can go through the APRs with us.
Paul, did you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, the APR program has routinely gone up and audited to whatever extent they do. I don't know if Joe has any record keeping on that, but they, I don't know if it's annually or biannually or whatever they've done, but that's been a normal course of the life of the lease at that orchard. And also, I would recommend at a future meeting, we might want to have, rather than going out to find other sources to give us legal advice, we have our own legal town counsel, and we, Jenny Merrill from Tom Harrington's office has been the person most involved. I would recommend maybe we get her at one of these meetings, and specific to the issue of the APRs and the how they are worded in terms of allowing the activities that some of the things that Will was just speaking to. I believe that has already been looked at, and that's why the lease, proposed lease, and the RFPs that we drafted were as expansive as they were to include just the sort of activities that Will was talking about. It certainly bears looking that in more detail, but I would just recommend we get our counsel, who's most versed in it, come with and talk with us about it.
Okay. Amy?
So Cindy, correct me if I'm misunderstanding. So in the packet she sent out, she did send out the APR, which I think is relevant to this, to the orchard. There's maps in the back of it, which outlines it. But I guess, and I also maybe, Will, you can just clarify me, because I'm not the expert in this area. You said the APRs had been sold off for this property. Maybe I just misunderstood what you said.
APR stands for Agricultural Preservation Restrictions. So
Yep.
the rights to develop the property have been sold off.
Oh, okay.
I don't know which part. I don't know. I mean, usually you would cut out a section of land for the residents, and it may or may not include the barn area, but that's a pretty specific thing where if you wanted to put a cider mill in and do a cidery or something like that, that if it's on APR land, you may not be able to change that structure.
Right, but if the structure isn't APR'd, so to speak, you could put a cider mill in it. That's what you're saying.
Right, Amy, and
Right.
you're right. It is in the documents that were sent through us. So it's right there.
We have maps that cover all that.
Right.
There's actually 3 different classifications. Some of the land's APR, some is conservation land, outright. Right, Sarah, down.
Right, and we, because we took funding from that self-help program.
Yep.
So it's all super documented.
But there is also a portion without any restriction on it, closer down by the reservoir too, down the hill down there. If you look at the map, there's a portion there that isn't restricted, but it is in the packets of information that was sent out.
Yeah, and when the select board had a previous conversation, and it was just a verbal conversation with town council. Our town council actually felt that it was written fairly broad from an agricultural perspective, that things that are now more associated with agriculture, agritourism, sort of like those destination things, that this does give a lot of flexibility to allow those things. It doesn't allow carving off to do a subdivision, doesn't allow hazardous material. It's rather explicit in what's prohibited, and what then is left over and the permitted is fairly wide.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right. So I think
That's the
go
that's
ahead.
the RF. Excuse me. That's the RFP or the review of the APRs. That is, I mean, is my if I recall, the RFP was fairly broadly written. But I don't think I got an update on it after we had written it to find out if the RFP and the APRs were congruent, that they, one matched the other, or if there was restrictions in the APR that would not allow some of the activities that were, kind of broadly stated in the RFP.
No, I think they're because we referenced the APR within the RFP. The APR is pretty broad as is, and anything that was identified as permitted within the APR would have been things that we were looking for within the RFP.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, great, thanks. So
And a lot of three letters are being thrown around: RFP, APR.
Right. So I think, given that the pruning needs to be done in the winter, I think in the short term, we really need to tour the orchard. I think was a great suggestion by Will as a group. Figure out who we want to invite to that tour. As far as getting somebody to come on board and help prune the trees or do immediate remediation actions. Joe, do we need to issue an RFP for that, or how do we go about that process?
So, and that's where for us to talk to say what's going to be involved. When we had a couple people out there once driving around and there was times, Paul, you were there, and sometimes Chuck. One of the recommendations was concentrate on an area. Don't try to do everything. Let's focus on, the section where most of the people do the pick your own. Focus on that to bring it up to speed and identify phases. We may be able to have something where we just need quotes and bids because we're going to be under a certain amount, but getting someone that says, here's what we'd be looking at either on a per tree basis or per hour, and how many can you do in an hour, that would help us get an idea as far as what we're looking at.
Okay.
So, can I interject a second? Because I feel like I know the property fairly well, having walked through it. We need to inventory the trees first and to designate what block they are in. So that way we're not always spinning our wheels. So to have one person go in, do a quick inventory, and because it's very apparent what is in distress, what is not. And as Jen referred to, the health of the orchard. Trees don't last forever. So we have a lot of old trees in there. And so that's an area that we don't need to waste time that in terms of pruning. So I think to kind of have someone come in, and I feel as though that's probably the most valuable person to pay on the immediate basis.
Amy, I wanted to talk just briefly about erosion. The orchard, we never build trees on, apple trees in great soils. It has since, I've been on that property since the, late 60s, early 70s. It's always been, it's really not a great soil for a lot of those trees. So when people walk on, it's going to be alarming, but it's always kind of been alarming at times. And I don't think Charles, over the last 20 years, tried to even know how to mitigate that. So it's ruddy. There's going to be a lot of not care given to that. But I think that now with more technology, it's easier to control that. You brought up a good point about the scab on the trees. The apples this year, not good. So they petrified. So I think for someone to come in and actually, I know Charles was trying to get all the apples off. I think it's actually helpful a little bit that you can still see some of those apples that are on and what they look like as well. I do know there's a lot of orchards that are using drones now to help facilitate inventory and tree growth and what needs to be done. So I don't know if we have old records of what each block was called. I can kind of go through and tell you history-wise what's newer or older, but there's some areas that they're just going to have to be taken out and replanted at some point. But I feel, obviously it was interesting to learn about the inventory, that's one thing that we don't need to do in terms of equipment, but I think we need to focus on the trees. If I can speak frankly, that I think to wait till the spring for an RFP, we're going to lose a whole year. And the town's going to have to put money in to help. I'm very concerned if Charles moves out in the winter and we don't have someone in that house, who's going to pay for the heat? Or we just need to say, okay, let's shutter it for the winter and drain the pipes and do all that. But, it's an old house. You may not even be able to drain the pipes.
Right.
So,
The question on the inventory of the trees, is there a master map that exists of what each row is?
Charles has all that because he planted a lot of it, but it's not something we could easily get from him.
Right.
So there should be, so he has to file records. There should be, I know that when we did the grants, we kind of knew what blocks were. Jen, I don't think we had that inventory. I can try and get it, but.
That was a question that Jared had from Berlin Orchards. He said, do you know what kind of apples are there?
Well,
and I said
that the fact that you've talked to a couple people that have worked there in the past, they know. Charles was pretty progressive like 10 years ago. He planted some new heirloom style varieties. And I apologize, I don't know the terminology for some of these. So he did see that movement coming, but I don't know how we're going to get that inventory.
Yeah, so Owen Evans, who I walked around with, he has a lot of history, so he may be able to verbally tell people, or at least go around with someone, since he definitely spent time there. And just in terms of, and I understand the importance and the timeliness of getting an inventory of the apples and prioritizing which need to be saved and which we just need to forget about. I'm wondering, as part of that inventory, if it makes sense to do like a soil health, because I think, without the soil, you have nothing, especially with carbon sequestration and building soil health is going to be so important to building up a healthy orchard over time. So I would really love
Amy, I'm so happy that you mentioned that. It's important. Yeah. And I think that's where all the grower associations will help us, and UMass.
Yeah, and the Natural Resource and Conservation Division might be willing to help as well. They're actually potentially going to be cost sharing on compost for the community farm this spring, so they're a resource as well.
Okay, so would you think determining the soil health would be a short-term or a longer-term goal? Is that something that we need to do before the winter, or is that something that can wait till the spring?
If we can get a soil, if you even had a few soil samples at various areas, this all comes out to really mapping the orchard and to do that. So, Amy, I think whether you agree that if we could do something before a hard freeze, and you'll be able to see what chemical residue is in there. He didn't, to my knowledge, and granted, I'm not here a lot in the summer, there wasn't the same amount of chemicals applied this year. So I think if you're,
Right.
it may actually, Amy, be healthier now than what it was before. So,
Yeah.
but the invasives, the bummer of that is that the invasives have blown up over there.
The bittersweet is rampant.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Can I just add one last thing? When we talk about pruning, and I learned this a lot through SVT. So what's happened with the pruning in the last, I want to say at least solid 3-4 years, all of that just got pushed to the woods. It used to be that it was chipped or it was burned or stockpiled. So, and that's why that bittersweet also took off as well. So that's one thing. When we're bringing a pruner in, we need to know, what are we going to do with everything that has been discarded? So we need to think, are we going to bring in, is the town going to pay for bringing a chipper? I mean, it is gnarly. So, and that's something when we forecast whoever comes in for the next decade or whatever, they're going to have to bring all that stuff off the stone walls. And that's, you know, that takes, it just takes time. But so when we look for who's going to do the pruning, you can pay someone to come in and prune, but they're not going to collect all the cuttings.
All right, so that's another thing to address.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's focus on touring the orchard, getting together as a group and doing that, walking the orchard, and then inventorying the trees, figuring out who can come in and help us do that. Go ahead, Paul.
I think it might be, sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, yep. Sorry. One name that was bandied about earlier that, Will mentioned, the O'Neill father and son had been out there. Father Ed O'Neill, who I've known for a long time. He's president of JP Sullivan, and his son Sean runs Fairview Orchards. I put a call into, just as a follow-up, to Ed a week or so ago, but I guess he was out of state. But Sean did leave me a return call. I also had an unsolicited recommendation on another orchardist who apparently worked on the orchard as far back as when Morrison was there, and also with Charles Auger for a while until at the end when he wasn't getting paid. It lives up in Harvard. It was a recommendation from Calvin Yap. But
do you remember his name?
Well, I've got it written down. I don't have it in front of me, Sarah, but you may well know it. But I'm just saying, I was doing this as a preface to all these potential resources we have. We probably ought to, rather than have them all individually or randomly, funnel them into Joe so that they're in one central location. So that if we're going to ask groups or for folks to tell us what services they can provide, what kind of analysis they could do, before we issue out an RFP or do things legally through, Chapter 30, see whatever, some of these folks, what they'll tell us in terms of their analysis, free of charge up front. What we think you need is you got to do this kind of pruning, and we can offer these kind of services, blah, blah, blah. Ask for, some sort of, some sort of written proposals on what kind of services any of these entities would offer. But then we also need to coordinate, for those that haven't already done it, visits to the site too, which we have to be careful about given the legal tenuous situation we're in. So that's all I was going to say.
Can I ask, Joe, can you set up a Google Doc? So, I mean, tonight, you guys, everyone just shared some amazing resources. If we can come up with and start to develop categories for that Google Doc. And so as we come across someone, like the conversations that everyone's had, to come in, who they are, who made the call, what their resource, and obviously what their opportunity or benefit to us is. And Will, you've got some great contacts just to let us know who, when we look at organizations that we can partner with, just contacts. So you guys, we threw out some great information tonight.
Right.
And as Cindy mentioned earlier, Chuck DeCoste had a couple of others that, I don't think I've heard any of those names mentioned either. Right. I don't remember who they are, but we need to gather that information in one spot. So Google Docs is a great idea, and as long as Joe's doing it.
Thank you, Joe.
Great suggestion, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, so let's do that. Let's funnel all the information that everybody shared tonight to Joe. He'll put it into Google Docs and we'll organize it. And and then as far as a site visit amongst this group, we don't necessarily need somebody with us to do that. We can just do that as a group.
How
Or
many,
did you-
can I ask, how many people have never walked the orchard?
I've never walked the orchard.
Oh, wow,
Never.
wow.
Yeah, I know.
Can I back up one step? Have all the other people walked, like physically walked every block?
No,
One
I've,
time or other, I think I
Every
have.
block.
Yep.
I don't
I've had
promise to do it
a
again.
brief
but I-
walkthrough.
You need some boots.
I mean, is that something you think would be beneficial?
I do. It might be a little dicey, but yeah, I think we want.
But Sarah, as a pragmatic matter, ultimately we need to go to every block, but as an initial introduction to this group, we don't need to do that extensive.
No, I guess what I'm offering is that if there's a person that's never walked some of the blocks and wants to go like one person with me or two people, I'm happy to get up early in the morning or sometime and go for a walk. I think it's really valuable. I'm not saying go into no buildings, nothing, just to go do perimeters or things like that. I'm happy to do that if someone wants to spend the time.
Okay. That sounds great. And we do have a map of the property.
Right.
We do.
Yeah. Yeah. So
we and again, I've repeated this a couple of times, but it's worth it. We have to be mindful that there's still people there, even if they're not there with benefit of a lease, and there's a legal situation. So somebody, whether it's Joe or whomever, Ed Mullen has been out there a number of times, the building commissioner, land use director. So whoever it is, somebody should be kind of, the official town person, on site with us.
right. Okay. So all right. So we'll set that up. Thank you, Sarah, for that. And then now getting back to funneling out the information to Joe and then figuring out who we're going to utilize to inventory the trees. Seems to be the first immediate course of action for us.
So it sounds like we threw out maybe 3 or 4 names today so it's Joe, I'm just trying to clarify. So whoever the chair is going to be or whoever, would Joe be the one that would reach out? I feel like that's a lot of work for Joe, or just one person that sends the same email to 4 or 5 people to see if they would
So
like
why
to
don't we come up with
inventory.
the structure of what that email would be once he gets those contacts? Like, what do we want to ask them? Just to introduce them, and what are we looking for from them?
I think we have to be urgent and say
Right.
that we would love to have this done. We recognize, the season is winding down, but to be able to say, do you think you could do it fairly quickly before, as Will talked about, before the snow falls?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So something, to be done immediately.
And
So
it doesn't have, I'm not looking for an inventory that is literally it doesn't have to be exactly how many trees.
Okay.
We do need that, but I guess in the urgency, I guess anyone can kind of, it doesn't have to be that person. Anyone can kind of run up and down. There's a lot of.
You know what? It might be naive on my part, but Joe, you have a pretty good relationship with Charles, don't you?
Sort of.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I've watched you interact, and he's a gentleman, and you're good natured. I wonder, let's not presume the obvious. Maybe you could just ask for it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'll be stopping by the orchard on Friday, definitely, and I'll talk to him. I also think that we do have some of this and in the office, scanned documents, because a lot of especially for audits for the APR, we get those reports. So what I'll also do is pull through, because over the last 10, 15 years, the town's also collected a lot of documents as well. So that some of these things may be answered, or some may be a good foundation then to have Charles supplement, and then other people supplement their information as well.
So are we looking for an inventory of the kind of apples, or are we looking for an inventory of the condition of the trees?
Both.
I would hope both.
Both.
Okay.
And honestly, Joe, I'm very happy to hear that you have a good relationship with Charles. I do as well. And I think, honestly, this is about a legacy. We want, he was there, it was very successful for a long time. And so I think it's how we embrace it and just say, you know, it's an end of an era, but your legacy of these new trees that you've planted and that. So it's like, we're not trying to throw anyone under the bus. I mean, things happen and it's a pandemic. So I think that if we can kind of go a little bit more to the heartstrings, I think that might work. I'm hopeful.
No, I think you're right. We have never had an interaction, correct me when I go astray here, Joe, where Charles has been anything but a gentleman. I think he's mindful of his legacy. Mark, different story. If we never had a formal relationship with him, we just kind of met him in the the past year or two, and it's been kind of an experience.
Right.
It might be, and I hear what Joe is saying, just to drive some efficiencies, like there's a lot of existing information that can be paired with new information, but it might be really useful to still have someone who actually understands how to pull these reports together to kind of take everything and present it to us in a way that makes sense, because that's not something I have any expertise around. I think someone who really does would be able to kind of like pull it all together for us. I'm sure Joe has other things to do. And I noticed, I don't mean to like out him, Mr. Santero's on this call, and I think he's an arborist. Is that correct? He's going to speak up.
Yes, I'm an arborist.
Do you have
anybody that might be looking to do, contract work for the town, we appreciate and glad you're paying attention, but it's kind of distinct from our work here. Although I don't know, Mr. Santoro, if it's not something you're interested in as a work gig, your input is welcome.
Well, I guess my question to him was, is my understanding he's an arborist of some type? Is that correct?
Yes, I'm an arborist that works for Tarla Tree Experts.
Yeah, and that's why I don't know if you have any recommendation. You're more of an expert than me.
Well, talking about inventories, you need to set the parameters of what that inventory will be and whether or not it's tree risk, tree health. Apple tree variety might be really tough to distinguish at this time of year. And you might actually need to wait until the apples start to grow. I'm not an expert on that because there's so many different varieties of apples and genetically they're very, very similar. But from listening to all the conversations, I think the focus should really be not so much on the trees themselves at this point, and more on the land itself overall, and getting the invasives under control, dealing with any erosion issues or drainage issues that you've discussed. Apple orchards, to my recollection from back in school, they can rotate the crop out every 20 to 30 years. That's not uncommon. So the trees themselves can be pruned and fixed. And, part of our coursework at UMass was to regenerate an orchard that had been left dormant for 30 years. So stuff like that can be fixed so that it can be used as production for fruit. But the land itself, if the land is left unmaintained, that's a bigger issue in my eyes.
All right, thank you. Okay, so Joe, why don't you speak with Mr. Auger Friday? See if he does have an inventory of the variety of apples that he's willing to share with us. And I think getting an inventory of the health of the trees is important. And then if we can do the soil samples in conjunction with that as well, I think that would be helpful, especially before the ground freezes and the frost comes in.
Yeah, and it might be someone separate who needs to come in and do invasives work. Maybe someone from UMass Extension, I don't know. Or maybe Will has a recommendation for invasives and drainage and erosion issues like
Right.
Mark had mentioned that was so important for.
Yeah, that's really important. Is that something that we need to do?
I can help with that because we deal with that all the time with conservation. So, and yeah, I can help.
And Sarah, is that something that is done in the fall and the winter time? Dealing with invasives, or does it depend on it?
Conservation Trust deals with it all the time. So let me try and bring back to the committee in a perfect world when things are treated. It's hard now. It's hard now because it's all, almost past and going to seed. So it's just it's just spreading. So
I think we did actually have some control down by the banks of the Nagog there.
Right, down on the lake. And so, yep. So Conservation Trust does that well. Sudbury Valley Trustees does that very well on some of the properties on the CRs here at campus, on different campuses here. So.
Okay. All right. And then the other issue is erosion. I don't know at all how to deal with that.
Yeah, that's something that will take time.
Okay. Is that an immediate concern, or is that something more deal with the invasives? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but we'll definitely keep that on
Some
the
of that, actually, it's funny, just from a recent conversation, I would never know anything ordinarily about that subject matter, but talking with Chris Stoddard, the town's engineer, recently, the subject of Nagog Hill Road came up, from work that was done there not too long ago, and he was very familiar with the soils. We may actually have on hand soils report for that road because it affected what type of asphalt covering they were going to put on the road.
Right.
He into it freely.
The Conservation Commission, Amy Green might have that because that was very sensitive because we were dealing with the reservoir and town of Concord on that as well.
Right. So you'd agree some of that analysis has probably already been done.
Yep.
Okay. Joe, can you follow up with Amy and Amy Green? You think Sarah has that?
I think so.
If not, Chris might.
Yeah. Chris, is he still?
He's still there.
Okay.
Not forever, but yeah.
Okay, I misunderstood then. I thought he had left. Okay.
He's leaving. He hasn't left yet.
Okay.
Cindy,
do we have a sense of how often we'd like to meet going forward?
I think we need to meet weekly.
Okay.
I really do. I mean, until at least until the winter time. In the winter time, then we can start talking about the APRs and all of that stuff. But I think for the short term right now, the next month or so, we need to meet weekly.
With the exception of perhaps the night before Thanksgiving.
Right.
If you insist, Sarah, I guess we could.
I'm just saying, I might get in trouble for that one.
No, I'm kidding.
People may well have different commitments, but I don't think it has to be on the same night. But say, for instance, this Monday, ordinarily, or 2 Mondays a month, we have a selectman meeting. We don't this upcoming Monday. We could meet as soon as then if.
And I know for me, I can't do Tuesdays because of conservation, but.
No, Monday was what, okay, yeah.
Mondays work okay. I mean, Wednesdays. But.
A topic I'd suggest, Amy, you're an upcoming chair, are you? Yeah.
Yes.
Cindy, I don't know who is. Well, whoever, I would suggest a topic for our next meeting is, since we have a lot of important tasks on parallel tracks, we develop a calendar of when certain things need to get done, or try to develop one, work on that. Because there's going to be analysis when, we, at the same time, we need to be looking at language for, RFPs. At the same time, we need to be doing, market analysis of what's possible there, scheduling site visits, a lot of things on parallel tracks. So I think a calendar can be important.
Okay. A calendar of action items.
Right.
Okay.
We need to actually set up a calendar too, though, when we're meeting.
Well, that too.
Okay. So everybody's going to send the information that they shared tonight to Joe Layden. Joe's going to set up a Google Docs form. Joe, are you okay with that?
Yep.
Okay. And then from there, we'll have all that information in one place. We're going to follow up with Amy Green and Chris Stoddard about a soil analysis to see what's already been done and figure out what additional work may need to be done for that. Joe's going to speak to Charles about seeing if he has an inventory of the trees, the kind of fruit that he's willing to share with us. You'll have that on Friday. We'll have that answer. And then we're going to then take all the information from people that was shared tonight about different orchardists and whatnot, and then determine what kind of email we want to send out to people in what language we want to incorporate, asking them if they're willing to come in and inventory the trees for us in the short term. Correct?
I think it's exciting that you have some people that we've mentioned some names tonight that have some history with the orchard.
Right.
I mean, that makes me very happy.
And I know that someone that worked at the orchard too had reached out to Jamie Cruz at one point as well recently, and she has his contact information as well. So we do have some great resources of people that work there. It's wonderful.
Excellent.
And then evasives.
I'll bring.
You're going to go with that, Sarah?
Yep. I'll bring that to the next meeting. Just history, just so people can be informed. Yep.
Okay. All right.
The only other thing I'd suggest, and it was a topic we talked about earlier, is just on the legal front again, whether we have Jenny come into us or whether Joe just talks to Jenny about take another look at the APR language, as Will brought up earlier, just to make sure we what we think is the case and how restrictive it is and how, what the parameters that are allowed there. The other factor I'd like to have a council's opinion on is, as we're talking about dealing with, potential contractors here, I don't want to run afoul of any 30B issues here. Maybe Joe's, feels comfortable handling that, but we should be mindful of that since we're talking with people prospectively that might end up doing some work for the town for pay,
Can I ask and nominate Will to work with Jenny on that? I think I would feel really comfortable having Will be able to look at APRs together with her as an active farmer. If Will, I can delegate that to you.
That would be all right. I'm not particularly familiar with them. I don't. I mean, I can understand it and
I think
through it, but it's not something that we don't deal with it on our farm.
No, I guess I'm more looking at it from a farmer's perspective. If all of a sudden you read something that, and actually I think you're more inclined to do it because you're seeing it from the ag perspective of like, oh, well, that's curious, that was left out, or, oh, that was curious because it was put in.
Okay, I can.
Maybe Joe can facilitate that conversation so you're not left out trying to,
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was
the three together would be awesome.
Right. That sounds good.
Yeah, I think one of the things I could just, coordinate a telephone call so that if once you've had a chance to sort of take a look, if there's questions, the other option is basically, because as we start to formulate recommendations beyond sort of looking at the maintenance, it may make sense for her to spend 15-20 minutes with us and just sort of say, here's what the APR does, what restrictions are in place, so that if we had any back and forth, well, what about this, what about that, we can have that discussion. Looking at it myself, I think that there's going to be a lot of stuff that will be able to happen. There may be some more unique application things that getting Will's perspective on and getting a response from Jenny may help in that effort as well.
Can I just ask, just for my own clarification, what's Paul keeps talking about a 30B, that's a concern, and who, so I don't know what that is, and I don't know who Jenny is.
So let's not confuse with 40B.
No. Fortunately for this property, we will never be discussing 40B.
Right. 30B is state procurement laws. So there are certain laws we need to follow when we're entering into contracts for services.
Okay.
And then Jenny is Jenny Merrill, who works for our town council office. She's one of the attorneys there.
Yeah. And I'm sure you know MDAR has APR experts as well, Massachusetts Department of Agriculture, that could be a resource.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Great
Perfect.
resource.
Jen, is there anything you want to add? Anything you want to take on?
I'm just taking it all in.
Okay. I just didn't know, because just when you introduce yourself, like with your background as far as organization and bringing everything together, like maybe working with Joe, if we're filtering all this information to Joe, figuring out how we're going to organize it and utilize it.
Can I ask one question? And I think we may have already talked about it, but I didn't see it in my notes. Is there someone that's going to go through structural integrity of the structures? Because I know some of the sheds up in the orchard are, I would say, not long for the world.
The building and commissioner's already done that.
Okay.
Ed Mullen's already done that. Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
So is that something that can be put in the Google Docs as well?
There is an existing report, isn't there, Joe?
I mean, he provided some sort of like a quick assessment.
Yeah.
That's fine. Perfect.
So
Yeah, we have that.
Yep. Awesome.
And then just another question, like as we're looking at the APR and potentially looking at changes, like if we change the APR that currently exists, is there an opportunity for public input just because there's a butters that may like have concerns or not? I don't know.
I don't think you can change that.
Yeah,
we
we
can't
can't
change
change
it.
the
APR
APR.
is set in stone. Yeah, that cannot change.
So talking to Jen is just to help like more deeply understand.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that vein, are we in the conversations I have with Jen and with Joe, are we open to anything, or are we really hard line on it's an orchard, it has to stay an orchard, everything that's in trees now needs to be maintained that way? I'm trying to get a sense. I understand that there's certainly neighborhood concerns where if it was to change very much, there could be increased traffic. There could be, different, it'd be a different environment. And where are folks coming from on that? To me, it's a very kind of a 1950s setup where it's a monocultural sort of an orchard. It's out of a time when agriculture basically became specialized, and most farms that are surviving and thriving are doing more than one thing. They're doing several things to survive. I brought up the agricultural entertainment down to the destination sort of thing. And that's not something that's developed as a market necessarily by choice. It's really a necessity. I guess some direction on that would be really helpful.
Right. Well, I think you just hit it. Well, what do we need to do to have the orchard survive? Like you said, the way it's currently set up, times have changed. I think everybody here recognizes that. It's just a matter of, how much are the neighbors willing to tolerate? What do we think is the best use or the best fit? But certainly I think being open to something beyond just a standardized apple orchard is certainly something I would be open to. I think overall, I think everybody here would be open to.
Right.
And part of history, there was a significant crop cover up until a couple of years ago. So there were a lot more vegetables being grown. And I think that just happened that it didn't work anymore in terms of labor. So
right. And actually
it was starting to evolve, but then stopped.
Well, actually, so council did remind me, because this question came up before, there is specific language with the orchard that it needs to be used for agricultural purposes. And there's a specific definition of that. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as we have that conversation going forward. And Jenny will be able to provide that with us. But I do remember somebody asked that at one of our prior select board meetings.
Yeah, and I really agree with what Will Pickard says. I think we need to explore other avenues for the farmer who comes on board to generate income and wealth for themselves. Depending on how we set up the lease, if they're going to have to invest in new equipment, and then if they're going to be responsible for maintaining like sidewalks or putting in sidewalks or fixing the barn, there are assets. We have to be careful about how much money this potential operator needs to put into something that they can't sell off as wealth or an inheritance. And they need to be able to generate income for themselves. So if they decide to leave the farm and move on or retire, that they have something to take with them. And it needs to be profitable to some degree. Otherwise, maybe the best model is some sort of like nonprofit model, like Sholin Farms potentially. I think that needs to be explored for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, does anybody have, so let's set our next meeting date. Do you guys want to do Monday, the 15th is an off night for the select board, or do you want to stick with Wednesday, the 17th?
We actually, I hate being the
We
administrative
having a
person
meeting
here.
Monday?
We can't, because tomorrow's a holiday. We
Oh.
can't.
Oh, we don't
It
have.
You don't
doesn't
have
count.
time to post for Monday?
Yeah, we can't. Yeah.
Okay. So are people free Wednesday, the 17th?
Yep.
Yes.
Should be.
Will? Paul?
Yeah, that should be. I don't have a calendar
Okay.
for next week in front of me.
All right, so we'll post for Wednesday, the 17th at 6.
Yeah, same time in Zoom. That works for me. Does
Yeah,
that
I
work
think
for the
Zoom
group?
works good.
Yeah.
I know there was talk of meeting in person. Unfortunately, there has been, well, now that the library's open, maybe not, but I think this just works better because otherwise if we're in person, then we have to schedule LCTV, and it just makes it think easier to record these meetings if we just do it by Zoom.
Yep.
And meeting space too has been limited lately, so. Okay, so we'll do Zoom Wednesday.
Are
the
we
17th.
able to schedule a visit at the orchard, or are we still formulating what kind of information we want before we want to do that?
Yeah, we can schedule a visit. Sarah offered to be our tour guide, so.
Does
We
that
can
have to be
definitely do that.
posted, or how does, unclear on that. Does it need to be posted, or can we meet as a incomplete group?
For site visits, as if all you're doing is observing and you're not discussing
Yep.
and sort of like sharing conclusions, you don't need to post. If you want to be able to have discussions, you have, say, you're being joined by a consultant that you want to have a back and forth, then you would need to post.
Well, that's if it's the whole committee, but if say some designee of the committee is
if
going
there
out
was-
with, yeah.
Yep. If there's 5 of you, if 2 wanted to go out, no.
Okay. When did you want to go out, Will?
Afternoons, mid-morning or afternoons before probably 3 o'clock. I don't know if anybody else is interested or where folks are at with that, but.
Right.
I think people can just use emails. We can kind of, when someone wants to go out, just shoot me an email, or, I mean, it's easy to
Well-
navigate. People can always just go walk. I mean,
Well, no, we don't want to have unlimited access to the property.
Right.
We're not,
Yeah.
but, so it should be coordinated in through Joe. I'm not discouraging people from
Yeah.
doing it in smaller groups, but we should keep track of who's going out onto the property on the auspices of the town.
Yeah, because
And
as
I would
far as
encourage
running
those folks that
into,
haven't been there yet, try and get it done by next, by our meeting time. So maybe you can set a time, like Will says, before 3, whatever. Those of you that haven't been there already, schedule something.
okay, so why doesn't anybody that wants to do that, just email Sarah and schedule that? I can't do those times just because of work, unfortunately, but I'll figure out something. So it's not a big deal, but yeah, so if you want to do that, you can reach out to Sarah. That would be great. And
Okay.
just be mindful of our current tenants that are there as well. So to Paul's point.
Understood.
If we're going to be out there, Joe should be aware, Joe Layden, that is, that, so we just need to know who's out on the property.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Is there anything else to discuss?
Did we choose a chair officially?
No. No, we didn't.
Usually, well, you all put the minutes on me, so usually that's the position that no one wants, being the clerk.
Oh, the minutes?
No, I'm taking care of that. Just usually,
yeah.
I'm used to the clerk being the one no one ever wants to volunteer for.
Oh, yeah, the clerk. I can't do clerk.
But yeah, just.
Yep.
Okay.
Jen and Amy each volunteered for something, but I can't for the life of me remember what it was they were
Well,
volunteering.
Amy's
We
a vice chair,
volunteered.
but we're still
There
looking
just
for
wasn't
a
a vote.
chair. And I don't know. I think Jen Clancy would be awesome.
We both volunteered for the vice chair.
Right. And Amy, well, yeah, and Amy trumped you. She got in there first.
Cindy, you ran a good meeting tonight. Why don't you be chair and Jen be vice chair and Amy's the clerk? Is she? Is that?
I think we made Amy vice chair.
All right,
I
whatever.
can do that.
I give up. I don't
Perfect.
care.
Cindy, you'd make a great chair because you
Fine.
don't have enough to do.
Right. No, I don't mind. I'll be chair for this. This is fine. And we got Joe doing minutes or doing something.
But we still,
Yeah.
somebody, a member of the committee ought to be clerk, who has zero duties, which is, since Joe's doing all the minutes.
Yeah, because we do need to post minutes
Right, and they need to be signed by the clerk, whoever it is.
and we need to approve them and all that stuff. So, Jen?
Nancy's looking like she can do it.
Well, like I said, I'm not on any social media. I don't communicate
Good,
that way. So-
That's perfect. All you need to do is email.
Right. Yep. You just need to sign the minutes and the agendas that
You
Joe
just need
posts
to
and writes.
Type up the minutes, what we talked about, circulate them and,
All right.
I'm making up the minutes.
yeah.
No,
Joe's
Joe
making-
Layden is. Joe Layden's gonna.
Okay.
Oh, all right. All right, good.
But the clerk is officially the member of the committee who's responsible for them, but the staff, in this case, in often.
It's
is
just
person.
forwarding them, Jen, email. That's all you need.
You just get all the glory.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Should be all you, Joe. That's fine. Fine.
All
All right, good.
Yep.
So,
Can we, in the interest of time, can we do a blanket nomination? I'll nominate Cindy Napoli as chair, Amy Tarla Lewis as vice chair, and Jen Clancy as clerk for the AgCom ad hoc working group. That'd be
Second.
not the Nagog Hill AgCom ad hoc working group.
I second it.
all right, motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor, it needs to be a roll call vote. Jen Clancy,
Yep.
Sarah Seward,
Sarah Seward, aye.
Will Pickard,
Aye.
Amy Tarla Lewis,
Bye.
Paul Glavy,
I
and Cindy Napoli is aye. All right, perfect. So we are organized. All right, and so our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, the 17th at 6 p.m. It'll be a Zoom meeting.
get all that information into Joe, anything anybody's got.
Yeah,
And at 7:31, I make a motion to adjourn our first meeting.
excellent.
Bye.
Second, motion's made, motion to adjourn's been made and seconded. All those in favor, Jen Clancy,
Aye.
Sarah Seward,
Sarah Seward, aye.
Will Pickard,
Aye.
Paul Glavy,
I
Amy Tarla Lewis,
Yeah, I.
Cindy Napoli is aye. And that concludes our first meeting. Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
great
Thank
first
you.
meeting.
That was
Thank
really
you.
good.
Have a good week,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.